Hey everyone, I'm here to help you relax and drift off tonight. If you enjoy using these videos to fall asleep, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more calming content. Share where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I'd love to know. Now settle into a cozy spot, take a deep breath, and let's start unwinding together. The legend of the Soul Thief, a cursed painting hidden away for centuries, was little more than a whisper in the world of art. Many believed it to be a myth, an eerie story meant to dissuade curious art collectors from pursuing things best left forgotten. But there were those who insisted the painting was real, and those who believed in its power. A portrait so lifelike, it seemed to watch its viewers, ensnaring their very souls. It was said that whoever gazed too long into the eyes of the figure in the painting would lose a part of themselves, leaving behind only an empty shell of a person, drained of vitality, joy, and spirit. The victims would waste away, while the painting grew more vivid, as though feeding on the very essence it had stolen. In the heart of London, a wealthy art collector named Edgar Thorne became obsessed with finding the Soul Thief. He had spent years amassing rare and ancient works of art, but nothing intrigued him more than the stories of the cursed painting. Despite the warnings of his peers, he believed it was a masterpiece waiting to be uncovered. He was convinced that, like all great legends, it was rooted in truth. One evening, a mysterious letter arrived at Edgar's mansion. It was unsigned, the handwriting elegant and precise. Inside was a single line: "The painting you seek lies beyond the veil of dust in the cellar of Blackridge Manor." Blackridge Manor had long been abandoned, its last owners driven mad by some unnamed terror. Most locals avoided the place, speaking of strange occurrences, flickering lights, whispers in the dark, and shadows that moved of their own accord. To Edgar, it seemed the perfect place to hide something of immense value. Accompanied by his loyal assistant, Clara, Edgar made his way to Blackridge Manor under the cover of night. The air grew colder as they approached, the towering structure looming like a forgotten giant. The windows were shattered and ivy crept along the stone walls, as though nature itself sought to reclaim the place. Inside, the manor was eerily quiet. Dust hung in the air, and the wooden floors groaned beneath their feet. They made their way down a spiral staircase to the cellar, guided by the dim glow of a lantern. The air grew damp, and an unnatural chill crept over them. At the far end of the cellar, hidden beneath a thick layer of cobwebs and dust, they found it, a large ornate frame encasing a dark, weathered canvas. Edgar brushed away the cobwebs with trembling hands, revealing the painting beneath. It depicted a figure cloaked in shadows, their face partially obscured. But it was the eyes that captured Edgar's attention. Cold, piercing, and disturbingly lifelike. He felt as though they were staring directly into his soul. "Is this it?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Edgar breathed. "This is the Soul Thief." Despite Clara's protests, Edgar insisted on bringing the painting back to his mansion. He believed he could study it, unlock its secrets, and perhaps even break its curse. They hung it in his private study, a grand room filled with ancient tomes and relics from around the world. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Edgar spent hours examining the painting, sketching it, and writing notes. But soon, strange things began to happen. He would hear faint whispers late at night, though no one else was in the room. The eyes of the figure in the painting seemed to follow him, no matter where he stood. Clara noticed the changes in Edgar too. He became more withdrawn, his once vibrant energy dimming. He rarely ate or slept, and dark circles formed under his eyes. Despite this, he refused to part with the painting. "I'm close," he insisted one evening, his voice hoarse. "I can feel it. There's something within the painting, something alive." One night, Clara awoke to the sound of footsteps echoing through the mansion. She found Edgar standing in front of the painting, staring into its eyes as though in a trance. His hand reached out toward the canvas, trembling. "Edgar!" Clara called out, but he didn't respond. Panicking, she rushed forward and pulled him away. He blinked as though waking from a dream and gasped for air. "I saw them," he whispered. "The soul trapped inside. They were calling to me." Clara realized then that the painting was far more dangerous than either of them had imagined. It didn't just steal souls, It imprisoned them. Every victim who had ever gazed into its eyes was still trapped within, their essence feeding the cursed masterpiece. Desperate to save Edgar, Clara turned to the old tomes in his library. She read about ancient curses and the power of binding spirits to objects. One book mentioned that such curses could only be broken by destroying the object, by fire. But when Clara suggested burning the painting, Edgar recoiled in horror. "No, it's too valuable," he shouted. "This is the find of a lifetime." "It's killing you, Edgar," Clara pleaded. "It's feeding on you. If we don't destroy it, you'll be lost forever." Torn between his obsession and the growing fear of his own fate, Edgar finally relented. Together, they carried the painting to the grand fireplace in the main hall. Clara doused it with oil, and with trembling hands, she lit a match. The flames roared to life, consuming the canvas. As the fire burned, a chilling wail echoed through the room, a chorus of voices as though the souls trapped within were being released. The air grew heavy, then suddenly light, as though a great weight had been lifted. When the fire died down, nothing remained of the painting but ash. In the days that followed, Edgar's health began to improve. The whispers stopped, and the mansion felt warm and welcoming once more. Though he mourned the loss of what could have been his greatest discovery, he knew it was the right choice. The legend of the soul thief ended that night, its curse broken, its victims freed. But the story lived on, a cautionary tale for those who sought to meddle with forces beyond their understanding. And so, the soul thief became a distant memory, a reminder that some masterpieces are best left undiscovered, and that not all treasures are meant to be possessed. The small coastal town of Saltmere was a quiet, unassuming place, known for its constant rain and the cobblestone streets that always glistened with moisture. Few tourists visited, preferring sunny destinations over Saltmere's perpetually gray skies. But beneath the dreary calm of the town lay a secret whispered by locals, a chilling tale of a spirit that haunted reflections in puddles. It began as mere folklore, a tale to frighten children into behaving. Parents warned their kids not to stare too long into puddles after the rain, claiming they might glimpse a pale figure staring back. Yet over the decades, there were enough strange incidents to keep the legend alive. And then came the disappearances. One cold autumn morning, Emily Harrington, a journalist from the city, arrived in Saltmere. She had heard the stories and thought it would make a great feature for her newspaper's Legends of England series. As she stepped off the bus, the drizzle had already begun, and the cobblestones shimmered with fresh rainwater. Puddles formed in the cracks, reflecting the overcast sky and Emily's cautious footsteps. Her destination was the Old Tide Inn, a centuries-old establishment run by a kindly but eccentric innkeeper named Mrs. Whitaker. The inn was nearly empty, save for a few locals who gathered in the evenings to exchange tales over pints of ale. "You've come about the puddle spirit, haven't you?" Mrs. Whitaker asked as she handed Emily her room key. Emily raised an eyebrow. "I didn't mention anything about that." Mrs. Whitaker chuckled softly. "You didn't have to. Folks only come to Saltmere for two reasons, fishing or ghosts, and you don't look like a fisherwoman." That evening, as the rain tapped gently against the windows of the inn, Emily joined the locals by the fire. Among them was Tom Hensley, an old fisherman with a face weathered by years at sea. "You'll want to know the truth about the spirit," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "It's not just some children's tale. I've seen it myself." The room grew quiet as everyone leaned in, eager to hear Tom's story. "It was years ago, after a heavy storm. The streets were flooded and puddles were everywhere. I was walking home late at night when I noticed something strange. In one of the puddles, I saw my reflection, but there was something else, too. A pale figure stood behind me, though when I turned, no one was there." "What did you do?" Emily asked, her voice steady, but her hands tightening around her notebook. "I ran," Tom admitted, "but the figure followed me in the puddles. Every time I looked down, it was closer. I didn't stop until I reached my house, locked the door, and covered every reflective surface." "And did it stop?" Another local, George, chimed in. Tom nodded slowly. "For me, yes, but others haven't been so lucky." Determined to get to the bottom of the legend, Emily decided to explore the town the next day. She visited the local library and pored over old records, One entry from the 18th century caught her attention. It described a woman named Eleanor Blackwell, accused of witchcraft and drowned in a marsh just outside Saltmere. The villagers believed her spirit had cursed the town, haunting the water and reflections ever since. As she left the library, the rain had picked up, forming large puddles on the cobblestone streets. She tried to avoid looking down, but curiosity got the better of her. Peering into a puddle, she saw nothing unusual, just her own reflection. Relieved, she turned to head back to the inn, but as she walked, she felt an inexplicable chill run down her spine. Glancing into another puddle, she froze. Behind her reflection stood a faint, pale figure with hollow eyes. Emily spun around, but the street was empty. Heart pounding, she quickened her pace. Every puddle she passed seemed to hold the same haunting figure, growing clearer and closer with each step. By the time she reached the inn, she was breathless, her mind racing with fear and disbelief. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She kept seeing the figure in her mind every time she closed her eyes. Frustrated and terrified, she decided to confront Mrs. Whitaker. "I saw it," Emily confessed. "The spirit in the puddles. It's real." Mrs. Whitaker's expression darkened. "You shouldn't have looked," she said softly. "Once you see it, it doesn't stop until it takes you." "What do you mean, takes me?" Emily demanded. "The spirit, Eleanor, it seeks to drag people into her world, into the reflections. That's why people disappear." "There must be a way to stop it," Emily insisted. Mrs. Whitaker hesitated before replying. "There's an old ritual, one that hasn't been tried in years. It's dangerous, but it might be your only chance." Guided by Mrs. Whitaker, Emily gathered the necessary items: a silver mirror, black candles, and a vial of salt water from the marsh where Eleanor had been drowned. The ritual had to be performed at midnight, near the largest puddle in the town square. As the clock struck 12, Emily lit the candles and positioned the mirror over the puddle. The rain had momentarily stopped, leaving the surface of the puddle eerily still. She poured the salt water into the puddle and began reciting the incantation Mrs. Whitaker had given her. At first, nothing happened. Then the water rippled violently, and the pale figure of Eleanor emerged, her ghostly form rising from the puddle. Her eyes were filled with sorrow and rage. "Why do you haunt this town?" Emily asked, her voice trembling but firm. "I was wronged," the spirit whispered, her voice echoing as though from a great distance. "Betrayed by those I trusted, I seek justice." Emily took a deep breath. "You don't have to hurt anyone anymore. Let me help you find peace." For a moment, Eleanor hesitated. Then slowly her form began to dissolve, the puddle growing still once more. The air grew warm, and the oppressive weight that had hung over Saltmere lifted. In the days that followed, the townsfolk noticed a change. The rain continued to fall, but the haunting presence in the puddles was gone. Emily wrote her article, not just about the legend, but about the truth she had uncovered. Saltmere remained a quiet, rainy town, but the fear of the puddle spirit faded into history. And though Emily left with a story, she also carried with her a mirror, just in case the spirit ever returned. For in Saltmere, where the rain never truly ceased, one could never be certain what might lurk in a reflection. In the heart of the old city of Ravencourt, there stood an ancient, abandoned museum known as Blackstone Hall. Once a grand institution filled with artifacts from around the world, it had fallen into disrepair decades ago after a series of unexplained tragedies. Whispers of a cursed statue hidden within the halls had spread through the town like wildfire, but no one dared enter the decrepit building to see if the stories were true. The legend of the cursed statue was chilling. It was said that those who looked upon it descended into madness, haunted by visions so horrifying that they could no longer distinguish reality from nightmare. Some claimed that the statue's origins were demonic, while others believed it was crafted by an ancient civilization that worshipped dark forces. Evelyn Carver, a young archaeologist with a fascination for cursed relics, had heard the tales of the Blackstone Hall statue since childhood. She was drawn to the mystery not by belief in the supernatural, but by the challenge of uncovering the truth behind the legend. When she inherited her late uncle's estate, which included access to Blackstone Hall, she knew it was her chance to finally investigate. Accompanied by her close friend and fellow historian, Michael Gray, Evelyn decided to explore the museum. They arrived on a stormy afternoon, the sky a dull gray, casting an ominous glow over the crumbling building. The front doors creaked loudly as they pushed them open, revealing a dim, dusty interior. The air was thick with the scent of decay and neglect. Faded portraits hung askew on the walls, and shattered glass cases lined the corridors. As they ventured deeper into the museum, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Michael asked, his voice echoing slightly in the vast empty hall. "Come on, Michael, it's just an old story," Evelyn replied, trying to sound confident. "We'll take a few pictures, document the statue, and leave. Nothing to be afraid of." After hours of searching, they finally found it in a hidden chamber at the back of the museum. The statue stood on a cracked pedestal, draped in a tattered black cloth. Evelyn hesitated for a moment before pulling the cloth away, revealing the figure beneath. The statue was grotesque, a humanoid figure carved from a dark, polished stone. Its face was twisted in an expression of anguish and malice, with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into the soul of anyone who looked at it. Strange symbols were etched across its surface, glowing faintly in the dim light. Michael took a step back, an uneasy feeling washing over him. "There's something wrong about this," he muttered. Evelyn, however, was captivated. She examined the statue closely, noting the intricate craftsmanship and the strange markings. "This is incredible. It doesn't match any known style or culture. It's almost as if it was made to frighten." Michael turned away, unwilling to look at the statue any longer. "Let's take a few photos and get out of here." But before they could act, a low, almost imperceptible hum filled the room. The air grew colder, and shadows seemed to stretch and dance along the walls. Evelyn felt a sudden dizziness, as if the room itself was spinning. I think we should leave now," Michael said urgently, grabbing her arm. But it was too late. Evelyn's gaze had locked onto the statue's eyes, and she couldn't look away. That night, Evelyn began to experience strange visions. Shadows moved in the corners of her room, whispering her name. She saw images of the statue wherever she looked, etched into the walls, reflected in mirrors, even appearing in her dreams. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they became screams. Michael, concerned for her well-being, returned to her house the next morning. He found her pacing the living room, muttering incoherently. "Evelyn, what's going on? Are you okay?" he asked, but she didn't respond. Her eyes were wild and her hands trembled as if she were fighting an unseen force. I can't stop seeing it," she whispered finally. "It's everywhere. It's watching me." Realizing that the curse might be real, Michael decided they needed help. He reached out to Professor Howard Blake, a retired historian and occult expert who had studied Blackstone Hall's history. Blake listened carefully as Michael recounted their experience in Evelyn's deteriorating condition. "You should never have uncovered that statue," Blake said gravely. "It was cursed by its creator to drive anyone who gazes upon it into madness. The symbols carved into it are not merely decorative. They're seals, meant to bind a malevolent entity within the stone." "Is there any way to break the curse?" Michael asked desperately. Blake hesitated. "There's a ritual, but it's dangerous. It requires confronting the spirit trapped within the statue and banishing it back to the void. If it fails, the curse will claim not just Evelyn, but anyone involved." That night, under Blake's guidance, they prepared for the ritual. They gathered ancient texts, lit black candles, and drew a protective circle around the statue, which they had reluctantly brought back to Evelyn's house. Evelyn sat in the center, trembling but determined to rid herself of the curse. As Blake began chanting the incantation, the room grew icy, and the shadows deepened. The statue's eyes began to glow, and an unearthly wail filled the air. Evelyn screamed as the entity within the statue tried to take hold of her mind. "Hold on, Evelyn," Michael shouted, gripping her hand tightly. The symbols on the statue began to glow brighter, and cracks appeared on its surface. Blake continued the chant, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. Finally, with a deafening crack, the statue shattered, releasing a blinding light. The entity let out one final shriek before vanishing into the void. Evelyn collapsed, breathing heavily. The whispers were gone. The curse had been lifted. In the days that followed, Evelyn began to recover. The visions faded, and her mind became clear once more. Blackstone Hall was sealed off permanently, its dark secrets left to rot with time. Though the curse had been broken, Evelyn knew she would never forget the terror she had experienced. She continued her work as an archaeologist, but she now approached every artifact with caution, knowing that some mysteries are better left unsolved. As for the cursed statue, its fragments were buried deep beneath the earth, far from prying eyes. Yet in the quiet corners of Ravencourt, some still whispered that its spirit lingered, waiting for the day it could rise again. In the quiet town of Ashcroft, nestled in a valley surrounded by thick woods, there was an old manor at the edge of town. It had stood for centuries, its windows cracked and dark, its once grand gardens overgrown with thorny bushes. No one dared go near it, not because of creaking floors or eerie drafts, but because of the ghost that was said to haunt its halls. The legend was peculiar. Unlike other spirits that brought terror and harm, this ghost whispered truths. The townsfolk called it the Whisperer, and it didn't merely speak any truth. It spoke the kind of truth that people didn't want to hear, the kind that could ruin lives, destroy friendships, and shatter illusions. One evening, a group of friends gathered in the dimly lit diner in Ashcroft's main square. Among them were Clara, an adventurous young woman with a penchant for ghost stories, and Ethan, her childhood friend who never believed in such things. "I don't get it," Ethan said, stirring his coffee. "Why is everyone so afraid of a ghost that just talks? What's the worst it could say?" "It doesn't just talk," Clara replied, lowering her voice. "It tells you things you don't want to know, things that could change your life forever. People who hear it, they say it drives them mad." Ethan scoffed. "Sounds like a load of nonsense. I bet it's just some old story to keep kids from sneaking into the manor." Clara raised an eyebrow. "If you're so sure, why don't you prove it?" A murmur went around the table as the others glanced at each other nervously. Daring someone to go to the manor was a game they often played, but no one had ever actually gone through with it. This time, however, Ethan's pride got the better of him. "Fine," he said. "I'll go. Tonight." Clara's eyes widened. She hadn't expected him to agree. "You're serious? Dead serious?" That night, Ethan stood at the gate of the old manor. The wind howled through the trees and the full moon cast long shadows over the crumbling stone walls. He pushed the gate open, its rusty hinges groaning in protest, and made his way up the overgrown path. The front door was unlocked, just as the story said it would be. He stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath his feet. Dust hung in the air, illuminated by the pale moonlight filtering through the broken windows. "All right, ghost," he said aloud, trying to steady his nerves. "If you're real, show yourself." For a moment there was only silence. Then a cold breeze swept through the room, and he heard it, a faint whisper just behind him. "You're afraid that you'll never be good enough." Ethan spun around, but there was no one there. His heart pounded in his chest as the whisper came again, this time from the other side of the room. "You hide behind your jokes, but inside you doubt yourself every day." "Who's there?" he demanded, backing toward the door. The whisper didn't answer his question. It didn't need to. It simply kept speaking, voicing fears and insecurities he had never admitted to anyone. Ethan fled, his footsteps echoing through the empty halls as he ran back to town. Word of Ethan's encounter spread quickly. Some people dismissed it as a prank, but others believed him, especially when he refused to talk about what he had heard. Over the next few weeks, curiosity grew. A few brave or foolish townsfolk ventured into the manor, only to return pale and shaken. Each person who entered heard something different, but the effect was always the same. The ghost revealed truths they didn't want to face, truths that gnawed at their minds long after they left. There was Mrs. Cartwright, who had spent years pretending to be happy in her marriage. The ghost whispered her deepest regret, that she had stayed with a man she didn't love. Then there was James, the local butcher, who prided himself on his honesty. The ghost reminded him of a lie he had told decades ago, one that had ruined a friend's reputation. Before long, no one dared approach the manor. The whispers had become too much to bear. Despite the growing fear in Ashcroft, Clara found herself drawn to the manor. She had always been curious about the unknown, and part of her wanted to understand the ghost's purpose. Why did it whisper these painful truths? Was it malicious, or was it trying to help? One evening, unable to resist her curiosity any longer, Clara decided to go to the manor. She told no one, not even Ethan. Armed with only a flashlight and her courage, she made her way through the woods and up the overgrown path. The manor loomed before her, silent and foreboding. She pushed open the door and stepped inside, her footsteps echoing in the empty hall. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, her voice steady. "I just want to understand." At first there was no response. Then slowly the cold breeze returned, and the whisper began. "You seek the truth, but are you ready for it?" Clara clenched her fists. "Yes, you hide your pain well," the ghost whispered, "but deep down, you blame yourself for your parents' death." Clara's heart tightened. It was true. She had always carried the guilt, believing that if she hadn't insisted on that trip years ago, they might still be alive. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't run. Instead, she took a deep breath. "Why do you do this? Why do you whisper these things?" For the first time, the whisper paused, as if considering her question. To set them free. In that moment, Clara understood. The ghost wasn't trying to harm anyone. It was trying to force them to confront the truths they had buried. Painful as it was, facing those truths was the first step toward healing. She left the manor that night, forever changed. She shared what she had learned with the town, and while many still feared the ghost, some found comfort in her words. Over time, people began to see the whispers not as a curse, but as a gift, an opportunity to face their fears and find peace. The manor remained a place of mystery, but it was no longer shunned. Instead, it became a symbol of truth, a place where the brave could go to hear the whispers and perhaps find freedom from the burdens they carried. And so the whispering ghost of Ashcroft continued its eternal vigil, not to torment, but to help those who dared listen. In the small, sleepy town of Willow Creek, there stood a house at the end of Thornwood Street, known to locals simply as the Blackwood House. It was an old Victorian home, with peeling paint and ivy crawling up its weather-beaten walls. For decades, it had been the subject of countless stories whispered among children. Stories of strange happenings, ghostly figures, and most notably, an attic filled with forgotten toys that seemed to move on their own. One autumn afternoon, Evelyn Blackwood, a young woman in her late 20s, arrived at the house she had inherited from her late grandmother. She hadn't visited since she was a child, and standing before it now, memories of long-forgotten summers rushed back. The smell of pine from the nearby woods, the creaking front porch, and most vividly, the attic. Her grandmother, Edith Blackwood, had always kept the attic locked, warning Evelyn and her cousins never to enter. "It's not a place for children," she had said, her voice always carrying an odd mixture of sternness and fear. Now, years later, with her grandmother gone and the house empty, Evelyn felt an inexplicable pull toward the attic. As Evelyn explored the house, she found it mostly as she remembered. Dusty furniture, faded wallpaper, and the faint scent of lavender that always seemed to linger in the air. But something felt different, almost as if the house was waiting for her. Eventually, she reached the attic door. Unlike in her childhood, the door was now slightly ajar, as if inviting her in. Heart pounding, she pushed it open. The attic was large, its slanted ceiling casting deep shadows in the fading afternoon light. Dust motes danced in the air, illuminated by narrow beams of sunlight filtering through a circular window. But what caught Evelyn's attention were the toys. Dozens of them, scattered across the floor and shelves. Dolls, stuffed animals, wooden trains, and jack-in-the-boxes, all worn from years of use, seemed to watch her as she stepped inside. That night, as Evelyn lay in her old bedroom, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house was unnervingly quiet, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards, as if someone or something was moving around. Just as she was about to drift off to sleep, a soft sound reached her ears. It was faint but unmistakable, the delicate tinkling of a music box. She sat up, her heart racing. The sound was coming from the attic. Grabbing a flashlight, she made her way upstairs. The door to the attic, which she was sure she had closed, was now wide open. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. The music box sat in the middle of the floor, its lid open, playing a hauntingly familiar melody. As she approached, the music stopped abruptly, and a cold breeze swept through the room. Evelyn felt a shiver run down her spine. Suddenly, a soft giggle echoed from the shadows. Spinning around, she saw a doll, a porcelain figure with curly hair and glassy blue eyes, lying on its side. But she could have sworn it had been on a shelf when she entered. Over the next few days, Evelyn's unease grew. No matter how many times she tidied the attic, the toys would always end up in different places. Dolls she had placed on shelves would be found sitting on the floor, stuffed animals seemed to shift positions, and the wooden train tracks rearranged themselves into new patterns. One evening, determined to find answers, Evelyn decided to stay in the attic overnight. Armed with a blanket, a thermos of coffee, and a lantern, she settled down on an old armchair. At first, nothing happened. The house was silent, save for the occasional creak of the walls. But as the clock struck midnight, the atmosphere changed. A faint whisper filled the air, growing louder until it seemed to come from all around her. The toys began to move. Evelyn watched in disbelief as the wooden train started chugging along its track, its wheels turning without any visible force. Dolls turned their heads toward her, their glass eyes gleaming in the dim light. A stuffed bear began to walk across the floor, its stitched mouth opening as if trying to speak. Who's there?" Evelyn stammered, her voice trembling. A gust of wind blew through the attic, extinguishing the lantern's flame. In the darkness, the whispering grew louder, forming words that sent chills down her spine. "We are the Forgotten." Evelyn's fear gave way to curiosity. "Forgotten? What do you mean?" Slowly, the whispering faded, and a single doll, a ragged, one-eyed figure, rose into the air. In a childlike voice, it began to speak. "Long ago, we belonged to children. Children who lived here, who played with us, who loved us. But they grew up, and we were left behind, forgotten in the shadows. We waited, hoping someone would remember, but no one ever did." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes. She remembered her grandmother's stories about the house being an orphanage during the early 1900s. Many children had lived there, but few had ever been adopted. The toys weren't just toys. They were vessels for the spirits of those lonely children, bound to the attic by the pain of being abandoned. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know." Over the next few weeks, Evelyn made it her mission to honor the memories of the forgotten children. She cleaned the attic, restored the toys, and even opened a small museum dedicated to the house's history. Visitors came from all over to see the collection, and as they did, the spirits seemed to grow quieter, their whispers turning from sorrow to gratitude. One night, as Evelyn sat in the attic, she felt a warm breeze brush past her. Looking around, she saw the toys arranged neatly, as if in farewell. The same childlike voice spoke one last time. "Thank you for remembering us." And with that, the toys fell still, their spirits finally at rest. The Blackwood House became a cherished landmark in Willow Creek, known not for its hauntings, but for its story of remembrance and kindness. Evelyn remained its caretaker, dedicating her life to preserving the history of the children who once lived there. And though the toys never moved again, Evelyn sometimes thought she could still hear faint laughter in the attic, echoes of the forgotten children, now at peace. On a lonely stretch of coast, far from bustling cities and the noise of civilization, there stood a forgotten lighthouse. Known by the locals as Solitude Beacon, it had once guided ships safely through treacherous waters, but time, storms, and advancing technology had left it abandoned, its light extinguished for decades. Few dared to venture near the crumbling structure, not because of any real danger, but because of the stories. Whispers of a ghostly figure bound to the lighthouse, forever keeping a light that no longer burned. Elias Hart, a marine historian, had grown up hearing tales of the Solitude Beacon and the spirit that haunted it. As a child, he would listen wide-eyed as his grandfather, an old sailor, spoke of a tragic storm that had claimed the life of the lighthouse keeper, Walter Gray, nearly a century ago. According to legend, Walter had died trying to save a shipwrecked crew, and his spirit remained bound to the lighthouse, unable to find peace. Now, years later, Elias was determined to uncover the truth. He had spent his life studying old maritime legends, but this one felt personal. Armed with researched notes, a lantern, and a sturdy pair of boots, He set out for Solitude Beacon on a cold, windy evening. Reaching the lighthouse just as dusk fell, Elias was struck by its eerie beauty. The once proud tower was weather-beaten, its paint peeling and stones worn smooth by years of salty winds. The air was thick with the scent of the sea, and waves crashed relentlessly against the rocks below. Pushing open the creaky wooden door, he stepped inside. The interior was dark and damp, cobwebs clinging to the walls. He climbed the spiral staircase, each step echoing in the silence, until he reached the lantern room at the top. To his surprise, the large glass windows were clean, as if someone had been tending to them. But what truly caught his attention was the ancient lamp. It looked as though it had been recently polished. Elias reached out to touch it, but before his fingers made contact, a cold gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing his lantern. "Who's there?" Elias called, his voice steady despite the chill running down his spine. At first, there was only silence. Then a faint glowing figure appeared near the lamp, a man in an old keeper's uniform, his face pale and solemn, eyes fixed on Elias. "I keep the light," the figure said softly, "even if no one sees it." Gathering his courage, Elias asked, "Are you Walter Gray?" The spirit nodded slowly. "I am, and I remain as I must." "Why are you still here?" Elias pressed. "Why haven't you moved on?" Walter's expression grew pained. "Because I failed. That night, the storm was fierce and a ship was lost. I tried to save them, but I was too late. The light went out when they needed it most. I died with the weight of that failure, and so I remain bound to this place, keeping a light that no longer matters." Elias listened intently, his heart heavy with sympathy. He had read about the storm in old records. It had been one of the worst in the region's history, with multiple ships lost. But no record mentioned Walter's efforts to save the crew, only that the lighthouse had gone dark during the storm. "You didn't fail," Elias said gently. "You did everything you could. The storm was beyond anyone's control." Walter shook his head. "The dead don't care for excuses. They call to me, night after night, from the depths. I hear their voices in the wind, begging for the light." As if in response to Walter's words, the wind outside howled, and Elias could hear faint, mournful cries carried on the breeze. He shivered, realizing that the spirit was not imagining things. There was something supernatural tied to this place, something that kept Walter trapped. Maybe they need closure," Elias suggested. "Maybe they're not calling you to keep the light. They're calling you to let go." Walter seemed to consider this, his form flickering slightly. "I've tried, but their cries grow louder when I do. I fear leaving them in darkness forever." Elias thought for a moment, then said, "What if we light the lamp one last time? Together. Give them a final light to guide them, a way to move on." The spirit hesitated, then nodded. "It may work, but the lamp, it hasn't burned in years." "I came prepared," Elias said, pulling a can of oil from his bag. "Let's try." Working quickly, Elias filled the lamp and adjusted the wick. Walter watched silently, his translucent form flickering like a candle in the wind. When everything was ready, Elias struck a match and lit the wick. The flame sputtered, then caught, casting a warm golden glow throughout the room. As the light grew brighter, the wind outside seemed to calm, and the cries in the distance softened. Walter stepped closer to the lamp, his expression one of awe and relief. "They see it," he whispered. "They see the light." For a brief moment, the room was filled with a radiant glow, as if the souls of the lost sailors were passing through, finally at peace. Walter turned to Elias, a look of profound gratitude on his face. "Thank you," he said. "You've done what I could not." With those final words, Walter's form began to fade. The weight of his century-long burden lifted. As he disappeared, the lamp flickered one last time, then went out. Elias descended the lighthouse steps in silence, the weight of what he had just witnessed sinking in. The wind had died down, and the night was calm. Looking back at Solitude Beacon, he felt a sense of closure, not just for Walter Gray, but for the countless souls who had been lost at sea. In the years that followed, Elias published a book about the forgotten lighthouse and its haunted keeper. Solitude Beacon became a place of remembrance, a symbol of hope and courage for sailors and their families. And though the lighthouse remained abandoned, locals often claimed that on stormy nights, a faint light could still be seen shining from its tower, a beacon of peace guided by a spirit who had finally found his own. In a small, forgotten village nestled deep in the woods, an eerie legend persisted for generations. Locals spoke in hushed tones of a ghostly child who appeared only at twilight. Those who followed her vanished, never to be seen again. They called her the Whispering Child, a pale, silent figure who beckoned lost souls into the afterlife. Long ago, before the village was shrouded in fear, it was a thriving community known for its orchards and peaceful meadows. But one fateful winter, a terrible plague swept through the region, claiming the lives of many, including dozens of children. Among them was a little girl named Ilara, whose story became the root of the haunting legend. Ilara had been just 6 years old when the illness struck. Her parents, stricken with grief, buried her beneath the old oak tree at the village's edge, a place she had loved to play. But soon after her burial, strange occurrences began. Villagers reported seeing a young girl wandering the fields at dusk, her pale form shimmering like morning mist. Those who ventured too close would vanish without a trace. Fear spread like wildfire, and soon the village was abandoned, its fields left to wither. Over time, only the brave or the desperate dared to enter the woods where Ilara was said to roam. Centuries later, a historian named Dr. Maren Collins arrived in the village, intrigued by the legend of the Whispering Child. Maren had spent years studying folklore and ghost stories, but something about this particular tale felt different. It wasn't just the idea of a haunting, it was the way the villagers spoke of Ilara, not with hatred, but with sorrow. Determined to uncover the truth, Maren set up camp near the old oak tree where Ilara was said to appear. The villagers, though wary, provided her with food and warned her to leave before nightfall. But Maren, driven by a need to understand the past, refused to be frightened away. On her third night in the village, Maren finally saw her. As the sun dipped below the horizon and twilight bathed the forest in shadows, a faint figure emerged from the mist. It was a little girl with long, dark hair and a simple white dress. Her eyes glowed softly, and though her lips did not move, Maren heard a whisper carried on the wind. "Come." The voice was gentle, almost comforting, yet it sent a chill down Maren's spine. Summoning her courage, she stepped forward, determined to learn what she could. But as she approached, the child turned and began to walk toward the woods. Maren hesitated. She knew the stories of those who had vanished, but her curiosity outweighed her fear. Keeping a safe distance, she followed Ilara through the trees. The forest grew denser, and an unnatural stillness settled over the air. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. After what felt like hours, they reached a clearing bathed in an ethereal glow. At its center was a small pond, its surface so still it mirrored the sky above. Ilara stopped at the water's edge and turned to face Maren. This time she spoke aloud. "They were lost, and I showed them the way." Maren's heart pounded in her chest. "Who are you helping? Where are you leading them?" Ilara tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "To the place where they can rest. They wander, trapped between life and death, and I show them the path." Understanding dawned on Maren. Ilara wasn't a vengeful spirit. She was a guide, helping souls who had died unexpectedly to find peace. The villagers' fear had twisted her purpose into something sinister, but in truth, she was a child offering solace to the lost. Maren felt a deep sadness for the ghostly child. "Is there any way to help you move on?" she asked gently. Ilara shook her head. "I stay because they still come. When the last soul finds rest, I will go." Before Maren could ask more, the air grew colder, and shadows began to gather at the edge of the clearing. Dark figures emerged from the trees, their forms shifting and indistinct. These were the wandering souls Ilara had spoken of, lost, confused, and clinging to the world of the living. One by one, the spirits approached the child, who reached out her hand to each of them. As they touched her, their forms grew fainter until they disappeared entirely, their journey to the afterlife complete. But not all the souls were ready to leave. Some hesitated, their eyes filled with fear and anger. They turned toward Maren, sensing her life and warmth, and began to advance. Alara stepped between Marin and the approaching spirits. You cannot take her. She is not yours. The spirits halted, their forms flickering uncertainly. Marin watched in awe as Alara's glow intensified, spreading out like a warm light that enveloped the entire clearing. One by one, the hesitant souls stepped forward, guided by the child's gentle presence. As they touched her hand, they too faded into the light. When the last spirit was gone, the forest grew quiet once more. Alara turned back to Marin, her glow dimming. Thank you, she whispered, for helping me finish what I began. Marin wanted to ask what she meant, but before she could speak, Alara's form began to fade. The child who had guided souls for centuries was finally free. Marin returned to the village, forever changed by what she had witnessed. She documented the true story of Alara, the brave, selfless child who had spent centuries helping lost souls find peace. Her work brought new life to the village, turning it into a place of remembrance rather than fear. Though Alara was gone, some claimed they could still hear a soft whisper on the wind at twilight, a reminder of the little girl who once led the lost into the light. Nestled at the end of an old cobblestone street in the heart of a forgotten town stood Page and Prose, a small, weathered bookstore with a faded wooden sign that creaked softly in the wind. Though it appeared unremarkable from the outside, the townspeople knew better. Few dared to venture inside, and those who did rarely spoke of what they had seen. The whispers around town were always the same. Something strange happened in that bookstore. Something that no one could explain. Despite the warnings, it had become the perfect place for Clara Bennett to lose herself. An aspiring author and lover of all things literary, Clara had recently moved to the town, seeking inspiration and a quiet place to write. When she stumbled upon Page and Prose, she was immediately drawn to it. The first time she entered, the air inside smelled of aged paper and ink, with a hint of something metallic, almost like the scent of a summer storm. The shelves towered high, packed with leather-bound tomes, yellowed paperbacks, and strange books with no titles on their spines. The shop was eerily silent, save for the faint rustle of pages, though there was no one else in sight. Behind the counter stood an old man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. He wore a neatly pressed suit and had an air of mystery about him. When Clara approached, he gave her a polite nod, but said nothing. "Hello," Clara said, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet shop. "This place is amazing. Are you the owner?" The old man smiled faintly. "I am," he said. His voice was calm, almost too calm, as though it belonged to someone who had spent a lifetime speaking in whispers. "Welcome to Page and Prose. If you're looking for something special, you might just find it here." Clara smiled back, though his words unsettled her. She began browsing the shelves, running her fingers over the spines of the books. Many of them seemed ancient, with covers that were cracked and worn. Some had strange symbols etched into their leather bindings, while others appeared so new they looked as if they had just been printed. Clara pulled out a book titled Legends of the Forgotten Sea. As she opened it, a cold draft swept through the store, causing the candles on the counter to flicker. She barely noticed, too engrossed in the vivid illustrations of ghostly ships and monstrous sea creatures. But then something extraordinary happened. As she read a passage about a fearsome pirate captain known as Elias Blackthorne, she heard a sound behind her, a low, rhythmic tapping, like the echo of footsteps on wood. Turning around, she saw nothing. Yet the tapping grew louder, accompanied by the faint creak of a ship's deck. Before her eyes, a shimmering figure began to materialize. A tall man in a long coat, with a tricorn hat and a cutlass at his side. His eyes were hollow and his presence sent a chill through the air. "Who summons Captain Blackthorne from his eternal slumber?" the figure demanded, his voice like the roar of distant waves. Clara stumbled back, dropping the book. The moment it hit the floor, the figure vanished, leaving only a lingering coldness in the air. Heart pounding, she looked around, half expecting someone to laugh and tell her it was a prank. But the store remained as silent as ever, and the old man behind the counter merely gave her a knowing smile. "You found one of our more lively volumes," he said. "Be careful what you read here. Not all stories are content to stay on the page." Despite the terrifying experience, Clara was hooked. She began visiting the bookstore daily, each time drawn to different books that seemed to call out to her. Some stories brought forth harmless characters, playful animals, mischievous fairies, and kind-hearted heroes. Others unleashed darker presences, shadowy figures that lingered at the edges of her vision, whispering secrets she couldn't quite understand. One day she stumbled upon a peculiar book with no title and no author. Its cover was plain black, and the pages were blank. Curious, she asked the owner about it. "Ah, that one," he said with a cryptic smile. "It's a special kind of book. It writes itself as you read." Intrigued, Clara opened the book. To her astonishment, words began to appear on the pages, telling a story about a young woman who entered a haunted bookstore. As she read further, she realized with growing dread that the story was about her. Every detail, from her arrival in the town to her first encounter with Captain Blackthorn. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "It's your story," the old man said simply. Page and Prose isn't just a bookstore. It's a place where stories come to life, literally. And once a story begins here, it must be finished. As the days passed, Clara found herself unable to stay away from the bookstore. She tried writing her own story, hoping to take control of the strange magic that seemed to bind her. But every time she tried, the words would vanish from the page, as though the bookstore refused to let her end the tale. Characters from forgotten stories began to haunt her apartment. Shadowy figures that whispered in her ear at night. Ghostly animals that prowled her living room. The line between fiction and reality blurred, and Clara realized with growing horror that she was becoming part of the bookstore's collection. Desperate, she confronted the old man. "How do I end this? How do I escape?" He looked at her with a mix of pity and amusement. "There's only one way, my dear. You must write the ending. But be warned, once you finish your story, you may never be the same again." Determined to break free, Clara returned home and began writing. She wrote about her experiences in the bookstore, about the characters that had come to life, and about the old man who seemed to control it all. As she wrote, the words glowed on the page, as if imbued with the same magic that haunted the store. When she reached the final chapter, she hesitated. How should the story end? Should she destroy the bookstore, banishing its magic forever? Or should she become its new guardian, taking the old man's place? In the end, she chose a third option. She wrote herself walking away from the bookstore, free from its grasp, but leaving the door open for those who sought the magic of stories. As she wrote the final sentence, a blinding light filled the room, and she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The next day, when she returned to the street, Page and Prose was gone. In its place was an empty lot, as though the bookstore had never existed. But Clara knew better. Somewhere in some forgotten corner of the world, the haunted bookstore still waited, ready to lure in another storyteller. And she finally finished her first novel, a tale about a haunted bookstore where stories came to life. It became a bestseller, though no one ever truly believed it was real. But Clara knew the truth. Some stories aren't meant to stay on the page. They live, waiting for the next reader brave enough to turn the first chapter. There was a river that wound through the heart of Greystone Hollow, a small village hidden in the valley between two mountains. Known as the Murkwater, it shimmered eerily in the sunlight, its surface always calm yet uninviting. The river's dark reputation had earned it many whispered names: the Drowning River, the Whispering Depths, and most chilling of all, the River of Lost Souls. Legends passed down through generations warned villagers never to swim in its waters. Those who did were never seen again, vanishing beneath the surface without so much as a ripple to mark their passing. Despite the warnings, there were always a few who dared to challenge the river's sinister reputation. Some believed it was nothing more than a village superstition, while others were lured by the river's strange beauty. Long ago, before Greystone Hollow was a thriving village, the river had been a lifeline for the people who lived there. Its waters were clear and its currents gentle. According to ancient stories, the river was home to a benevolent spirit, a guardian who blessed the land and its people with bountiful harvests and pure water. But everything changed when outsiders came to the valley, bringing greed and violence with them. They sought to control the river, building dams and polluting its waters in their quest for wealth. The guardian spirit, heartbroken and enraged by the desecration of her home, withdrew deep into the river's depths. Her sorrow turned to wrath, and she cursed the waters. From that day on, anyone who entered the river would be pulled under by unseen hands, never to resurface. As time passed, the legend grew, and the villagers learned to fear the Murkwater. They built their homes far from its banks, and only ventured near it to draw water or fish from its edge. Even then, they always stayed vigilant, wary of the river's haunting pull. One summer evening, a group of local teenagers gathered near the riverbank. Among them was Ethan, a brash and headstrong boy known for his reckless dares, and Lena, his childhood friend who often tried to talk him out of trouble. The others included Mark, Claire, and Sam, who followed Ethan's lead more out of fear of being ridiculed than genuine bravery. "You're all scared of a stupid story," Ethan taunted, skipping a stone across the water's glassy surface. "It's just a river. Nothing's going to happen if we go in." "You're crazy, Ethan," Lena said, crossing her arms. "You know what they say about the river. People disappear." "Stories to keep kids from having fun," Ethan scoffed. "Watch this." Before anyone could stop him, he stripped off his shirt and waded into the water. The river felt colder than he expected, sending a chill through his bones. But he wasn't about to back down in front of his friends. He swam a few strokes out, grinning back at them. "See? I'm fine," he called, splashing the water playfully. Suddenly, the air grew unnaturally still, and a faint whispering sound filled the clearing. Lena's heart raced as she strained to hear the words, but they were too faint to understand. "Ethan, come back!" she shouted, her voice trembling. But Ethan didn't respond. His grin faded as something brushed against his leg beneath the water. He kicked, thinking it was just a stray branch or a fish. But the touch returned, firmer this time, as if a hand had gripped his ankle. "Guys, something's down here," Ethan yelled, panic creeping into his voice. He tried to swim back, but he couldn't move. It was as though invisible hands were pulling him deeper. The others watched in horror as Ethan struggled, his arms flailing wildly. Before anyone could react, he was yanked beneath the surface. A single ripple marked the spot where he vanished. "Ethan!" Lena screamed, rushing to the river's edge. The water was eerily calm, reflecting the darkening sky above. There was no sign of Ethan. No splash, no bubbles, just silence. The group ran back to the village, breathless and terrified. They told the villagers what had happened, but there was little anyone could do. Search parties scoured the riverbanks, but no trace of Ethan was ever found. The villagers mourned his loss, though many weren't surprised. To them, it was just another reminder of the river's curse. Lena, however, couldn't accept it. She was haunted by guilt, feeling that she should have done more to stop Ethan. Night after night, she dreamed of the river and heard faint whispers calling her name. The voice sounded familiar, as if it belonged to Ethan. Driven by a mix of fear and determination, Lena sought out old Miriam, the village's wise woman who knew more about the river's curse than anyone else. Miriam lived in a small cottage near the forest, surrounded by herbs and charms meant to ward off evil. "The river won't give him back," Miriam said gravely when Lena explained her dream. "But there may be a way to find his soul." "What do I have to do?" Lena asked, desperation in her eyes. "You must enter the river at midnight, when the veil between the living and the dead is thinnest," Miriam said. "But beware, once you're in, the river will try to claim you too. You must not listen to its whispers, no matter what you hear." That night, Lena stood at the river's edge, clutching a charm Miriam had given her. A small silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon. The air was cold, and the forest around her was eerily quiet. Summoning her courage, she stepped into the water. The cold was bone deep, but she kept moving, wading further until the water reached her waist. The whispers began almost immediately, faint and insistent. They grew louder with each step, forming words that sounded like Ethan's voice. "Help me, Lena!" She squeezed the pendant tightly, forcing herself to ignore the voice. Suddenly, the current shifted, pulling her deeper into the river's center. She felt unseen hands grasping at her legs, but she kept moving forward. In the distance, she saw a faint glow beneath the water's surface. A figure trapped in the depths. It was Ethan. Without hesitation, Lena dove beneath the surface, swimming toward the glowing figure. As she reached out, the river's grip tightened around her, but she held onto Ethan's hand and pulled with all her strength. A blinding light erupted from the river, and Lena felt herself being thrown back onto the shore. Gasping for breath, she looked around and saw Ethan lying beside her, unconscious but alive. The villagers were stunned when Lena brought Ethan back. Though he was weak and shaken, he eventually recovered, remembering little of what had happened. Word spread that the river's curse had been broken, thanks to Lena's bravery. From that day on, the Murk water flowed clearer, its dark reputation fading into memory. Though the villagers still treated it with respect, they no longer feared it. And Lena, hailed as a hero, knew that some forces, no matter how dark, could be overcome by courage and love. But late at night, when the moonlight hit the river just right, some swore they still heard faint whispers on the wind. A reminder that the river never truly forgets. In the quiet village of Willow's Hollow, nestled between dark forests and rolling hills, strange tales had always circulated. Whispers of a ghost that meant well, but brought disaster wherever it went. For years, villagers spoke of small, inexplicable events. A cart tipping over just after a strange chill swept through the air, candles being snuffed out before a fire spread, or children inexplicably being found near the edge of the forest after wandering off. Everyone knew of the spirit, though few had ever seen it. They called it Mira, after a young woman who had died tragically a century ago. According to legend, Mira had been kind-hearted in life, always eager to help those in need. But fate had been cruel, and one fateful night, she had perished in a house fire while trying to rescue a neighbor's child. Though the child had survived, Mira had not. It was said that her spirit lingered because of her unfulfilled desire to protect others. However, in her spectral form, her attempts to help often resulted in calamity. No one knew whether it was a curse or simply the tragic irony of her existence. But the villagers had learned to fear Mira's presence. One autumn evening, a traveler named Elias Gray arrived in Willow's Hollow. Elias was a scholar of the supernatural, fascinated by tales of ghosts and spirits. He had spent years studying hauntings, and when he heard of the village's legend, he knew he had to investigate. The villagers were wary of Elias at first. They warned him about Mira, urging him to leave before he attracted the spirit's attention. But Elias was determined. He believed that ghosts were not inherently malevolent, that perhaps Mira could be helped and her tragic cycle of harm could be broken. He rented a small, creaky cottage near the edge of the village and set up his equipment. Old journals filled with notes, delicate instruments designed to detect changes in the air, and a lantern that flickered unnaturally whenever spirits were near. It wasn't long before Elias experienced Mira's presence firsthand. Late one night, as he sat by the fire reviewing his notes, the temperature in the room plummeted. His breath turned to mist, and the lantern flickered violently. He glanced around, heart pounding, as a faint glow appeared in the corner of the room. The glow grew brighter, forming the outline of a young woman with sorrowful eyes and a translucent figure. Her form flickered, as if struggling to maintain coherence. She raised a ghostly hand, pointing toward the fireplace. Instinctively, Elias turned just in time to see a stray ember land on the rug, beginning to smolder. He quickly stamped it out, his mind racing. Mira had saved him from a potential fire. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice steady despite the fear tingling in his spine. The ghost tilted her head, as if confused by his gratitude. Then, before he could say more, she vanished, leaving behind only the faintest trace of cold air. Over the following days, Elias observed more of Mira's interventions. Each time she appeared when danger was near, a toppled lantern that could have caused a blaze, a crumbling beam in an abandoned barn, a loose cart careening down a hill. Yet every attempt to help seemed to end poorly. While she had saved Elias from the ember, her sudden presence had startled a villager passing by the cottage, causing him to trip and twist his ankle. In another instance, Mira had tried to warn a farmer of a broken fence. The farmer, startled by her ghostly form, had fled in terror, leaving his livestock to scatter. It became clear to Elias that Mira's intentions were good, but her presence, cold, unsettling, and sudden, caused more harm than good. She was trapped in a cruel paradox, unable to stop trying to help, yet doomed to cause chaos each time she did. Determined to help Mira find peace, Elias delved deeper into the village's history. He visited the old church, where dusty records told the story of Mira's life and tragic death. He learned that Mira had been deeply loved by the villagers in her time, known for her selflessness and bravery. But there was one entry that caught his eye, a note written by the village priest shortly after Mira's death. She died with regret in her heart. She believed she failed to save the child, though the boy lived. Perhaps her soul lingers because she never knew her efforts were not in vain. Elias realized that Mira's spirit was bound by the weight of her perceived failure. She didn't know that her sacrifice had saved a life. If he could find a way to show her the truth, perhaps she could finally move on. Elias gathered the villagers and explained his plan. Though skeptical, they agreed to help. Together, they reconstructed the old house where Mira had died, creating a space reminiscent of her time. They placed an old portrait of the boy she had saved, now long deceased, above the hearth. That night, Elias lit the lantern and waited. As the hour grew late, Mira appeared once more, her figure flickering as before. This time, Elias spoke to her gently. "Mira, you didn't fail. The child lived because of you. Your sacrifice was not in vain." He gestured toward the portrait. Mira's gaze followed his hand, her ghostly eyes widening as she took in the image of the boy she had saved. A soft light began to emanate from her form, growing brighter and warmer. For the first time, Mira's expression softened into one of peace. Slowly, she began to fade, her outline dissolving into shimmering light. As she vanished, the coldness in the room lifted, replaced by a gentle warmth. The next morning, the villagers awoke to find the air in Willow's Hollow lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. The sense of unease that had hung over the village for years was gone. Mira's spirit had finally found peace. Elias stayed in the village for a time, writing about his experiences and sharing the story of Mira, the misguided spirit who only ever wanted to help. His tale spread far and wide, inspiring others to see spirits not as threats, but as lost souls in need of understanding. And so the legend of Mira the ghost became one not of fear, but of hope. A reminder that even in death, kindness endures, and that sometimes all it takes to break a curse is a little compassion. Hey everyone, I'm here to help you relax and drift off tonight. If you enjoy using these videos to fall asleep, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more calming content. Share where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I'd love to know. Now settle into a cozy spot, take a deep breath, and let's start unwinding together. The legend of the Soul Thief, a cursed painting hidden away for centuries, was little more than a whisper in the world of art. Many believed it to be a myth, an eerie story meant to dissuade curious art collectors from pursuing things best left forgotten. But there were those who insisted the painting was real, and those who believed in its power. A portrait so lifelike, it seemed to watch its viewers, ensnaring their very souls. It was said that whoever gazed too long into the eyes of the figure in the painting would lose a part of themselves, leaving behind only an empty shell of a person, drained of vitality, joy, and spirit. The victims would waste away, while the painting grew more vivid, as though feeding on the very essence it had stolen. In the heart of London, a wealthy art collector named Edgar Thorne became obsessed with finding the Soul Thief. He had spent years amassing rare and ancient works of art, but nothing intrigued him more than the stories of the cursed painting. Despite the warnings of his peers, he believed it was a masterpiece waiting to be uncovered. He was convinced that, like all great legends, it was rooted in truth. One evening, a mysterious letter arrived at Edgar's mansion. It was unsigned, the handwriting elegant and precise. Inside was a single line: "The painting you seek lies beyond the veil of dust in the cellar of Blackridge Manor." Blackridge Manor had long been abandoned, its last owners driven mad by some unnamed terror. Most locals avoided the place, speaking of strange occurrences, flickering lights, whispers in the dark, and shadows that moved of their own accord. To Edgar, it seemed the perfect place to hide something of immense value. Accompanied by his loyal assistant, Clara, Edgar made his way to Blackridge Manor under the cover of night. The air grew colder as they approached, the towering structure looming like a forgotten giant. The windows were shattered and ivy crept along the stone walls, as though nature itself sought to reclaim the place. Inside, the manor was eerily quiet. Dust hung in the air, and the wooden floors groaned beneath their feet. They made their way down a spiral staircase to the cellar, guided by the dim glow of a lantern. The air grew damp, and an unnatural chill crept over them. At the far end of the cellar, hidden beneath a thick layer of cobwebs and dust, they found it, a large ornate frame encasing a dark, weathered canvas. Edgar brushed away the cobwebs with trembling hands, revealing the painting beneath. It depicted a figure cloaked in shadows, their face partially obscured. But it was the eyes that captured Edgar's attention. Cold, piercing, and disturbingly lifelike. He felt as though they were staring directly into his soul. "Is this it?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Edgar breathed. "This is the Soul Thief." Despite Clara's protests, Edgar insisted on bringing the painting back to his mansion. He believed he could study it, unlock its secrets, and perhaps even break its curse. They hung it in his private study, a grand room filled with ancient tomes and relics from around the world. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Edgar spent hours examining the painting, sketching it, and writing notes. But soon, strange things began to happen. He would hear faint whispers late at night, though no one else was in the room. The eyes of the figure in the painting seemed to follow him, no matter where he stood. Clara noticed the changes in Edgar too. He became more withdrawn, his once vibrant energy dimming. He rarely ate or slept, and dark circles formed under his eyes. Despite this, he refused to part with the painting. "I'm close," he insisted one evening, his voice hoarse. "I can feel it. There's something within the painting, something alive." One night, Clara awoke to the sound of footsteps echoing through the mansion. She found Edgar standing in front of the painting, staring into its eyes as though in a trance. His hand reached out toward the canvas, trembling. "Edgar!" Clara called out, but he didn't respond. Panicking, she rushed forward and pulled him away. He blinked as though waking from a dream and gasped for air. "I saw them," he whispered. "The soul trapped inside. They were calling to me." Clara realized then that the painting was far more dangerous than either of them had imagined. It didn't just steal souls, it imprisoned them. Every victim who had ever gazed into its eyes was still trapped within, their essence feeding the cursed masterpiece. Desperate to save Edgar, Clara turned to the old tomes in his library. She read about ancient curses and the power of binding spirits to objects. One book mentioned that such curses could only be broken by destroying the object, by fire. But when Clara suggested burning the painting, Edgar recoiled in horror. "No, it's too valuable," he shouted. "This is the find of a lifetime." "It's killing you, Edgar," Clara pleaded. "It's feeding on you. If we don't destroy it, you'll be lost forever." Torn between his obsession and the growing fear of his own fate, Edgar finally relented. Together, they carried the painting to the grand fireplace in the main hall. Clara doused it with oil, and with trembling hands, she lit a match. The flames roared to life, consuming the canvas. As the fire burned, a chilling wail echoed through the room, a chorus of voices as though the souls trapped within were being released. The air grew heavy, then suddenly light, as though a great weight had been lifted. When the fire died down, nothing remained of the painting but ash. In the days that followed, Edgar's health began to improve. The whispers stopped, and the mansion felt warm and welcoming once more. Though he mourned the loss of what could have been his greatest discovery, he knew it was the right choice. The legend of the Soul Thief ended that night, its curse broken, its victims freed. But the story lived on, a cautionary tale for those who sought to meddle with forces beyond their understanding. And so, the Soul Thief became a distant memory, a reminder that some masterpieces are best left undiscovered, and that not all treasures are meant to be possessed. The small coastal town of Saltmere was a quiet, unassuming place, known for its constant rain and the cobblestone streets that always glistened with moisture. Few tourists visited, preferring sunny destinations over Saltmere's perpetually gray skies. But beneath the dreary calm of the town lay a secret whispered by locals, a chilling tale of a spirit that haunted reflections in puddles. It began as mere folklore, a tale to frighten children into behaving. Parents warned their kids not to stare, claiming they might glimpse a pale figure staring back. Yet over the decades, there were enough strange incidents to keep the legend alive. And then came the disappearances. One cold autumn morning, Emily Harrington, "Hey everyone, I'm here to help you relax. I'm here to help you relax and drift off tonight. If you enjoy using